This video will be a comparison between the Niner RIP9 and the Transition Smuggler. Now, even if you're not trying to decide between these exact two bikes, I still think you're going to get something out of this video because different bike companies have different views of geometry, and that's what I've noticed between these two bikes, and it does affect the ride quality. Now, I don't think I'm going to pick a winner because there really is no winner. They have different ride qualities, and it's going to come down to what you're looking for in a bike. So let me start off with a few component highlights that I'll mention. First of all, I prefer the bars on the Niner. Now, both of these are about the same price level. You can get them in different builds, but I like the carbon race face bar that Niner puts on the bike. I like the saddle on the Transition, so it's got an SDG saddle. I do like the Niner saddles, but I like the SDG a little bit more. As far as tires, they both roll really well on the road. I was actually surprised at how good these tires roll. The Schwabes on the Niner, they are 2.6s, and they don't feel that sluggish on the road, which again, I was pretty surprised about. This bike has an Assegai on the front, a Maxxis Assegai, and also a Maxxis Dissector on the rear. Again, really good rolling tire on the pavement. Now, fortunately, the ride that I did only had like a mile of pavement. After that, it was all dirt roads and single track. So what I did was I took these bikes up to Pisgah. I did a ride, if you're familiar with the area, it's up Clawhammer, down Black Mountain, down Avery Creek, and then back up and did middle and lower Black Mountain. I did it on the Smuggler, and then the next day I did the exact same loop on the Niner RIP9 to really get an idea of how these bikes compare. So let's talk about the ride quality. So first of all, I ran the Niner in the low position. Now that is one advantage of the Niner, is that you can change the geometry. So if you're riding up in the mountains where you're going faster, you can put the bike in a slacker mode and the bike's going to be more stable. And then if you are doing more cross-country trails, which I'll talk about near the end of the video, then you can put it in the higher position. And the higher position is going to put the Niner with a 66-degree head angle, and in the low position it's a 65, which is the same as the Smuggler. So both of these bikes I would consider are about the same category, that just all around trail bike category. And the Niner does have more travel, which I'll talk about coming up, but it's only 10 millimeters more. Another geometry difference between the two that really played into the ride quality was the front center. So the front center is the distance between the bottom bracket and the front axle, and that really affects how stable the bike feels. So the longer the front center, the more stable the bike is going to be on the descents, the less agile the bike's going to feel on slower, tighter trails. And so that really plays into how the bikes felt on the descents. Interestingly, the reach on the Niner is quite a bit shorter. So the reach on the Niner is 433 millimeters on a medium. Okay, both of these are mediums, so obviously that's going to change if you get a different size bike. But the main thing is Niner uses a shorter reach. The reach on the Smuggler is 460, so that's a 27 millimeter difference between the reach. Because of that, the Niner feels like a smaller, more maneuverable bike, and some people are going to like that, especially on tight climbs, if you're on more cross-country trails. If you are coming from a cross-country background and you like that really quick steering maneuverability in a bike, then the Niner is going to make you feel a little bit closer to home if you're coming from a cross-country background. Let's talk about climbing on these bikes, because when you ride Pisgah, you do a lot of climbing. The climb switch is really important on both of these bikes. They both come with the Fox Float X shock, and I found that it was really important to firm up the suspension on the climbs. If you didn't, not only did you get more pedal bob, but you also could get more pedal strikes because the bike just sunk into its travel real easily. If you're going over kind of techie, rooty, rocky climbs, you got more pedal strikes if you didn't do that. But the Niner has a more solid pedaling platform because of their CVA suspension. It's not marketing hype, it does work. When you stomp on the pedals, it does firm up the suspension so that you get a firmer pedaling platform, and it just felt a little bit more composed on the climb, so it's not bobbing around as much. The Smuggler is great on the climbs. I just preferred the Niner a bit more because of that. I felt like I could get over those, I call them root ledges or rock ledges, where you've got a little ledge formed by a root or a rock that sometimes is hard to get over if you're going up a 15% climb. I felt like the Niner just got over those things a little bit better. Now, what was really interesting is I wasn't like time trialing up the climbs by any means, but I just kept a steady pace going up Clawhammer, which is 50 minutes of climbing. And my times, I can't remember the exact time, but they were within like seconds, like 5 seconds of each other. So on a fire road, they both climb about the same. Now, the Niner is a pound heavier than the Smuggler, mainly because you've got a 36 millimeter stanchion tube front fork versus a 34, and also you got 2.6 tires. I think the frame weights are going to be about the same, but that pound difference, it didn't make a difference when I was climbing up a long fire road climb. I also felt it easier to get around tight switchback corners on the Niner because it is a bit more agile with that shorter wheelbase, shorter front center, and a little bit shorter reach. I did feel like I had more pedal strikes on the Smuggler versus the Niner. However, if you look on paper, the bottom bracket drop on the Transition is only 35 millimeters, whereas it's 39 on the RIP9. So that's how far the bottom bracket sits below the axles. And so that was, and again, that's in the low position on the Niner. You can raise it up. But I don't know, maybe if it's just that CVA suspension, but I did feel like I had less pedal strikes. Let's talk about descending, because that's where I felt a bit more of a difference between these two bikes. And this is where it's really going to come down to what you want in a bike. So the RIP9 feels shorter, as I mentioned before, and more lively on the descent. So you can change your lines easier on the Niner. The RIP9 has a bit more travel in the front and the back. Now, you can increase the travel by 10 millimeters on the Smuggler, which I'm going to be doing. So stock, it comes 130 millimeters of travel in the rear and 140 in the front, but you can take out a spacer in the rear shock and make it 140. So that puts these bikes the same as far as rear travel. Now the Niner does have not only more travel, so 150 versus 140 in the Smuggler, but you have a thicker stanchion tube fork, so 36 millimeter stanchion tubes. I didn't really notice the front end of the Niner being more stiff than the Transition. I did notice the little bit extra travel, which felt nice, but it was not a huge difference. I didn't really feel like when I got on the Smuggler that I just needed that more travel because of the geometry, and we'll get to that in a minute. But because of that slacker geometry, the longer wheelbase, I should say, it made the bike feel like it had about the same travel, but I could notice a little bit more travel in the rear, not the front, but mainly the rear. But like I said, I can increase the rear travel on the Smuggler. So the Smuggler feels more stable on the descents, and the front end feels more planted. I felt like on the Niner, if you weren't careful, you could push the front end a little bit too hard in a corner because of how agile it is. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not a cross-country bike, so it's still very stable, very planted, but the Smuggler felt more planted, and because of that, I felt a bit more confident on rough corners on the Smuggler, and even rougher trails. So those trails where you just got a bunch of rocks and the bike can get unsettled pretty easily, I felt a bit more stable, a bit more confident on the Transition Smuggler because mainly the longer wheelbase and the longer front center. Also, the dropper post on the Smuggler is 180 millimeters versus 150 on the Niner, and you can notice that, especially those really techy descents where you really need to get your weight back. That extra 30 millimeters in the dropper post, Transition makes their frames so that top tube really slants and they can put on a longer dropper post, which I really like. The Niner, I would say if you ride tighter trails, so tighter descents, and also tighter switchbacks, if you just like that bike that is very agile on the descents but still stable, and that's probably the biggest benefit of the Niner, is it is agile and stable at the same time. I think you would like a bike with if it's not the Niner, a bike with a little bit shorter wheelbase than a bike like the Smuggler. So definitely look on paper to see, you know, what the geometry numbers are, because it does make a difference. So one thing that's nice about the Niner is that you can put the bike in the high position, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you ride more cross-country trails. So if you need that bike that can bomb rougher descents in the mountains. Now, both of these bikes are not enduro bikes, so you could race them on enduro, but you're not going to be as fast over really gnarly trails as you would on a full-fledged enduro bike. But these bikes can hold their own. I mean, they're both so good. But if you like riding rougher descents and you want a bike that's pretty agile on more cross-country trails, then the Niner is nice because you can change the geometry, and you can put on, if you put on like smaller tires, like maybe like a 2.3 in the front and a 2.25 in the back, and put it in the higher setting, this bike would do pretty well on cross-country trails. Now, the weight with the smaller tires is probably going to be around 29-30 pounds, so it's not cross-country race bike, but it's going to be a little bit more versatile than the Smuggler. I haven't decided yet which one I'm going to keep, because I own the Niner. The Smuggler is a demo that I could probably purchase if I wanted to. So I've got to make the decision if I'm going to just send the demo back when I'm done, or see if I can buy it and sell the Niner. I'm still trying to decide that, and I need to decide within the next few weeks. I would say right now, I am leaning towards the Smuggler because I also have a spur and I have a cross-country bike. So I don't need that much versatility in this bike. So I like the way this bike feels on the descents, just a tiny bit more. I mean, it's tiny, but I do prefer the bike feeling a bit more stable. So it's a longer bike, and it's the trails I was riding. Now, if I take it to another trailhead, maybe I'll like the Niner better. I don't know, but at this point, I like the way the Smuggler descends better, and I like the way the Niner climbs better. So that's a lot to think about. The other thing about the Smuggler, that one reason I'm leaning towards keeping that one, is it's got SRAM Axis T-type. I've never owned a bike with Axis. I've demoed a bunch of them, but I've never owned one. It'd be nice to give a really long-term review of SRAM Axis, especially T-type, just to kind of see how it does over the long term. So anyway, let me know in the comments below if you've ridden bikes with similar capabilities, similar, you know, travel range, but with different geometries. What do you think? Do you prefer a longer bike, or do you prefer a bit shorter bike, you know, shorter wheelbase, shorter reach, that feels a bit smaller and more maneuverable? Let us know. If you have any other questions or comments, drop those below as well. And I've got some other videos coming up with the Smuggler. I'm going to compare it to the Transition Spur to see if this is just a dog on cross-country trails compared to the Spur, or is it okay on cross-country trails? And then I'll probably do a long-term review on the Smuggler. So stay tuned to the channel for those videos coming up. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.